The story of Noah's flood has been told for thousands of years. A righteous man, an ark, and a world cleansed of sin by water. It is one of the most famous tales of judgment in human history. But what if the flood was more than a story of animals and rainbows? What if it was a cover for something darker? The Book of Enoch, forbidden texts, and ancient myths hint at another layer of truth. World plagued by beings born of forbidden unions, creatures of appetite and blood. Could Noah's flood have been less about human wickedness and more about wiping out the first vampires? Tonight, we pull back the veil on one of the Bible's oldest stories to ask the question few dare to consider. Did the flood hide the truth about vampirism? Genesis tells us that before the flood, the earth was filled with violence. The Book of Enoch goes further, describing a time when angels called the Watchers descended to earth and took human women as wives. From their union came the Nephilim, giants, monstrous beings of insatiable hunger who devoured flesh, drained resources, and spread corruption across the world. These Nephilim were not ordinary men. Their appetite set them apart. They consumed livestock, crops, and finally, human blood. The earth itself, Enoch says, cried out under the weight of their violence. Humanity was not merely sinful, it was being hunted, drained, devoured. Here we find the first echoes of vampirism, beings that were half human, half divine, cursed with appetites that could never be satisfied. Their hunger defined them, their power terrified mankind, and their existence defied the natural order. But such creatures could not be allowed to endure. God looked upon the world and saw corruption, not simply of human hearts, but of flesh itself. And so the decision was made to cleanse the earth, to drown the corruption, to erase the Nephilim and their offspring forever. The flood was not just a punishment for wickedness, it was an extermination, a wiping away of a race that blurred the boundary between human and monster. Yet if this is true, then the flood was not simply about man's disobedience, it was about vampirism's first reign on earth. And the question we must ask is this: if the flood destroyed them all, why do legends of vampires, giants, and blood drinkers still echo across cultures long after Noah's Ark came to rest? The Book of Enoch spares no detail. The Nephilim were not merely giants of great strength, they were creatures of appetite. They devoured the fruits of the earth, consumed herds of cattle, and when nothing was left, they turned to mankind itself. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Here, in this forgotten text, we find a description that sounds eerily familiar. Blood-drinking beings, towering above mortals, cursed with insatiable hunger. Could the Nephilim have been the first vampires? Not pale nobles in castles, but ancient predators, whose size and strength made them gods of terror to early humanity. Their very existence was an abomination, neither fully angel or fully human. They could not be redeemed. They could not be destroyed by ordinary means, and so their hunger spread, staining the earth with blood. The cries of mankind rose to heaven itself, demanding intervention. What makes this account even more chilling is how similar it is to myths from every corner of the world. The Greeks spoke of the gigantes, monstrous children of gods and mortals. The Mesopotamians told of blood-drinking spirits called Utagu. Across the Americas, tribes recalled giants who stalked the night, devouring men. Different cultures, distant lands, yet always the same image, a hybrid race, cursed with hunger, feeding on mankind. Is it possible that these are not separate legends, but fragmented memories of the Nephilim, the vampire race before the flood? If so, then Genesis and Enoch were not the only ones to preserve the truth. Humanity itself remembered, carrying echoes of their terror into every culture, every myth. The Bible records God's judgment on these beings with precision. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The implication is clear: the Nephilim were not just wicked, they were targets. The flood was their execution, and yet, after the waters, they appear again. Numbers 13:33 records Israel's spies saying, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, How could this be? Were the Nephilim not destroyed? Did some survive the flood, or did their bloodline continue in secret, hidden within humanity itself? If the Nephilim were indeed the first vampires, then the flood was the first great purge. But history and legend suggests it was not complete. The hunger remained, buried in shadows, waiting for its chance to rise again. The flood was sent to purge the Nephilim, to wipe away corruption and restore creation. Yet the question lingers, if the Nephilim truly vanished beneath the waters, how did they reappear in the generations after? Did some escape judgment? Or was the curse carried aboard the ark itself? The Bible tells us Noah was righteous in his generation, chosen to preserve life. But the ark did not carry only Noah. It carried his wife, his sons, and their wives, 8 souls in all. And it is here that some traditions whisper a troubling possibility, that the bloodline of the Nephilim survived through them. Perhaps one of Noah's daughters-in-law bore the trace of forbidden's blood. Perhaps the infection of appetite passed silently through her veins. This theory explains the reappearance of giants after the flood. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the mighty warriors of Canaan figures too similar to the Nephilim to be coincidence. If the flood was meant to erase them, then their survival suggests that corruption was preserved within humanity itself, hidden in flesh and blood. Even more chilling is the covenant God makes with Noah after the flood. For the first time, he commands, "You shall not eat meat with its lifeblood still in it." Why such emphasis on blood? Why declare blood sacred, untouchable, forbidden, unless blood itself had already become the seat of corruption? Unless humanity's temptation to consume blood, the very essence of vampirism, was already present and needed to be restrained. In this light, Noah's Ark was not only a vessel of salvation, it may have been a vessel of contamination, a lifeboat carrying both righteousness and the seeds of the ancient curse. Humanity was preserved, yes, but so too was the hunger. Think of what this means. The flood, far from erasing vampirism, may have scattered it. Instead of giants towering openly over men, the bloodline diluted, passing quietly through human veins, hidden but never gone. Vampirism, after the flood, would no longer be a race of giants. It would be a shadow within humanity, surfacing in whispers, in legends, in bloodlines marked by power and appetite. If this is true, then Noah's Ark did not simply carry the future of mankind, it carried the curse of vampirism into every generation that followed. After the flood, God spoke directly to Noah. His words were not simply promises of peace, they were boundaries. Among them was one command unlike any before: "You shall not eat flesh with its lifeblood still in it, for the life of a creature is in the blood." Why this sudden prohibition? Before the flood, humanity had already fallen into corruption, but only now did God explicitly forbid the drinking of blood. Could it be because mankind, having lived among the Nephilim, had already learned their hunger? The Watchers had taught forbidden arts. The Nephilim had feasted on flesh and blood, and humanity may have been infected not only with violence, but with appetite. To declare blood sacred was to draw a line, to remind humanity that life itself belonged to God. But vampirism is nothing less than the violation of this law, the taking of life through blood, the theft of what is most holy. To the ancients, this hunger was not superstition, but the echo of a real curse, one already punished by the flood. Even more telling is the covenant sealed with a sign, the rainbow, a reminder that the world would not again be destroyed by water. But hidden in that promise is another implication, that corruption still lingers, and judgment would come in another form. If water could not erase the hunger, perhaps only fire could. As generations passed, blood became the central symbol of worship and sacrifice. Animals were bled upon altars. Priests sprinkled blood to purify. In Israel's laws, blood atoned for sin. Why such obsession with blood? Unless blood had already been desecrated, unless blood had already been tied to a corruption so deep that only blood could cleanse it. The vampire myth is built on this same foundation, that life is in the blood, and that to steal it is to curse oneself. Every tale of the undead, every whisper of restless spirits feeding in the night, points back to the same idea: appetite born of rebellion, thirst born of corruption. The covenant with Noah was not only about survival, it was about warning. And yet, humanity's fascination with blood never ended. From ancient sacrifices to medieval rituals, from secret societies to folklore, blood has always remained at the center. Could it be that this obsession is not cultural coincidence, but the residue of a memory, the memory of those who hungered before the flood, whose curse was carried beyond it? If so, then Noah's covenant was not only about preserving life, it was about containing a hunger that still lurks in the shadows of humanity. If the flood was meant to erase the Nephilim and their vampiric hunger, then Scripture presents us with a haunting contradiction. They returned. Long after the ark came to rest, Israel's spies entered the land of Canaan and reported with terror. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. How could this be? Were the Nephilim destroyed, or did their bloodline endure? Some traditions suggest the wives of Noah's sons carried the trace of their blood, smuggling the corruption aboard the ark. Others whisper that not all Nephilim were drowned, that some, possessing forbidden knowledge, survived in caves, mountains, or beneath the earth, waiting for the waters to recede. Still others argue their spirits lived on, disembodied and restless, becoming the demons that afflict mankind. Whatever the explanation, the evidence is undeniable. Giants returned. They were known as Anakim, Rephaim, Zamzummim, tribes of towering figures whose very presence spread fear. Their appetites, too, were legendary. Ancient texts outside the Bible describe them as blood drinkers, flesh eaters, predators of mankind. These beings were not random anomalies. They were the continuation of the pre-flood curse, the shadow of vampirism carried into the new world. Just as a vampire cannot die by ordinary means, the Nephilim curse could not be erased by water. It lingered, resurfacing in the bloodlines of nations. Consider this: nearly every culture after the flood retained myths of blood-drinking beings. In Mesopotamia, the Utiku and Akimu wandered restlessly, feeding on the living. In Greece, the Lamia preyed upon children. In Eastern Europe, tales of Strigoi spoke of the dead rising to drain life. Are these coincidences, or fragments of a shared memory, the same curse manifesting in different tongues? If vampirism is rooted in the Nephilim, then its survival after the flood makes sense. The ark did not cleanse humanity of hunger, it carried hunger forward. The curse was not drowned, it was dispersed, hidden in tribes, in bloodlines, in legends. And so we must ask, when Noah's family stepped onto dry ground, were they stepping into a world truly cleansed, or into a world where the curse of vampirism had merely taken new forms, waiting to rise again? If the flood was meant to erase the Nephilim and their vampiric hunger, then Scripture presents us with a haunting contradiction. They returned. Long after the ark came to rest, Israel's spies entered the land of Canaan and reported with terror. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. How could this be? Were the Nephilim destroyed, or did their bloodline endure? Some traditions suggest the wives of Noah's sons carried the trace of their blood, smuggling corruption aboard the ark. Others whisper that not all Nephilim were drowned, that some, possessing forbidden knowledge, survived in caves, mountains, or beneath the earth, waiting for the waters to recede. Still others argue their spirits lived on, disembodied and restless, becoming the demons that plague mankind to this day. Whatever the explanation, the evidence is undeniable. Giants returned. They were known as Anakim, Rephaim, Zamzummim, tribes of towering figures whose presence spread fear. Their appetites, too, were legendary. Ancient texts outside the Bible describe them as blood drinkers, flesh eaters, predators of humanity. These were not random anomalies. They were the continuation of the pre-flood curse, the shadow of vampirism carried into the new world. Just as a vampire cannot die by ordinary means, the Nephilim curse could not be erased by water. It lingered, resurfacing in nations and bloodlines, hidden in the veins of humanity itself. And consider this: nearly every culture after the flood preserved myths of blood-drinking beings. In Mesopotamia, the Utiku and Akimu wandered restlessly, feeding on the living. In Greece, the Lamia preyed upon children. In Eastern Europe, the Strigoi rose from the grave to drain life. Are these coincidences, or fragments of a shared memory, the same curse retold in different tongues? If vampirism is rooted in the Nephilim, then its survival after the flood makes sense. The ark did not cleanse humanity of hunger, it carried hunger forward. The curse was not drowned, it was dispersed, hidden in shadows, in legends, in bloodlines that reach into our own age. And so we are left with a final, haunting question. When Noah's family stepped onto dry ground, were they stepping into a world truly cleansed, or into a world where the curse of vampirism had only changed its form, waiting for the right moment to rise again?